Good evening, wherever you are. If today felt heavy, let it be heavy, just not on your chest for the next little while. You step, in the present tense, into a Jōmon Pine Village, where damp needles hush your footsteps, porridge steam rises like a slow exhale, and chestnuts roast with stubborn patience. And yes, here is your reality check. You probably won't survive this. The quiet, the slowness, the complete lack of anyone asking you to be productive. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and let me know how your day has really been, your worries, your exhaustion, or even a tiny joy that made you smile. I'm here to truly listen and offer the most sincere, heartfelt advice I can. Now, turn off the lights, take a deep, slow breath, let your tiredness melt away, and gently close your eyes. Let's drift together into tonight's dreamlike lands. And tomorrow morning, if you still remember, send me a message and tell me what you dreamed. You move forward, and the fog behaves like a considerate host, thick enough to soften the world, thin enough to keep you oriented. Pines stand on either side, trunks dark with moisture, needles holding beads of cold that cling instead of falling. The ground under you is springy, layered with seasons of fallen needles. Your steps make almost no sound, and that quiet feels strangely intimate, like the forest has leaned in to listen. The air smells of resin and wet bark, of earth turning itself into tomorrow. You notice how your shoulders want to rise, how your jaw wants to clamp, as if the day might ambush you again. But the air here does not ask you to brace. It simply surrounds you, patient and cool, the way shade surrounds a tired person on a long walk. Then the village appears, not as an announcement, but as a clearing that has decided to hold people. Pit dwellings rest half sunk into the ground, roofs sloping down like sleeping shoulders, thatch darkened by damp. Smoke threads upward through roof vents and dissolves into fog so neatly the sky looks unchanged, until you breathe in and feel warmth settle inside your chest. You slow without being told. Speed would be a loud object dropped onto a quiet floor. Figures move between dwellings with unhurried competence. Clothing layers hides and woven bark fibers, textures that look like the forest learned to become fabric. They notice you with calm attention, like watching wind shift through needles. Important, not dramatic. No one crowds you. The welcome arrives as orientation. Someone angles their body to guide you toward firmer ground. A hand indicates the center where heat gathers. A nod lands like permission to belong for a while without being questioned. At the village's heart, a fire burns low in a stone-edged pit. The flame is modest, not greedy, just a steady orange that breathes and holds. A soot-darkened pot rests near it, steam lifting in slow ribbons. The smell is simple: grain, water, time, and it settles into you like a blanket that doesn't need ceremony. You hover near the warmth and feel your hands open toward it, those anxious little workers finally given a job they understand. A woven tray is offered at the level of your hands, steady and unshowy. Chestnuts sit on it, some split open from heat, shells cracked in neat starbursts, others still closed, waiting. You take one carefully because it is warm enough to command respect. The shell gives under your thumb. When you peel it back, the scent rises sweet and earthy, faintly buttery. You eat slowly because this place is allergic to rushing, and the sweetness makes your mouth go quiet in the best way. Humor lives here, but it doesn't shout. It travels in small gestures. Someone adjusts a bundle of reeds with a tiny flourish, as if even labor deserves a little elegance. Someone else sets down a net with exaggerated tenderness, as if the net is royalty and the ground is unworthy. A child-sized figure darts, slows, then darts again, curiosity held in check by manners that grew from being watched and cared for. The village's amusement brushes past you like warm air, never demanding that you perform it back. Around the clearing, life continues with calm logic. Kindling is stacked under an overhang where rain cannot ruin it. Fibers rest in coils, ready to become baskets and cordage. Stones ring the fire, not only to contain heat, but to define a shared center, an agreed-upon heart. In a world like this, small choices keep people alive, and that seriousness makes the gentle moments feel earned. You realize you are being welcomed through the absence of pressure. No one asks you to be impressive. No one measures you. No one asks for a receipt for your presence. The fog shifts. The smoke shifts with it, folding into night like fabric. The forest holds still, the way a room holds still when someone finally relaxes. You breathe in warmth and wood smoke and damp needles. You breathe out whatever you dragged in with you, and the early night opens softly, as if it has been waiting all day to give you permission to become gentle. The early night keeps its promise, staying soft around the edges, and you remain near the fire just long enough to let warmth reteach your body that it is allowed to unclench. Smoke continues to thread into the pine fog, as if it has done this 1,000 times, which, in a place like this, it probably has. Your palms still remember the chestnut shell cracking, the small sweetness that tasted like the forest deciding to be kind. Then you begin to wander, not because anyone orders you to, but because your feet have quietly accepted that the village is safe enough to explore without constantly scanning for the next demand. The paths between the pit dwellings are not roads in the modern sense. They are agreements made by repetition. Damp needles compress under your steps and spring back slowly, leaving faint impressions that look temporary, like the ground understands privacy. You notice how the village is laid out with a kind of quiet intelligence. Dwellings sit where the earth is cooperative, slightly raised where water would otherwise linger, angled away from the sharpest winds, close enough to one another for community, far enough for breath. The spaces between them hold tools, stacked wood, and bundles of drying plant fibers under simple shelters. Nothing is hidden, nothing is flaunted. Everything is placed as if tomorrow is guaranteed to arrive and deserves preparation. You follow the needle path as it curves, and you begin to see what the villagers see all the time. The ground is not just ground, it is a page that keeps rewriting itself. Here, the needles are darker where the fog has clung longer. There, the soil shows through in a soft, slick patch where someone has walked often enough to press the forest's carpet thin. You crouch, slowly because quick movements feel rude in this stillness, and you watch how water beads on pine needles versus how it sinks into the darker earth beside them. The village's understanding of weather doesn't rely on drama, just detail. You lift your gaze and notice the fog's height. It sits lower now, hugging the ground more tightly, which makes the roofs look like islands. You notice how smoke from a roof vent rises for a few heartbeats and then leans, as if nudged by an invisible hand. Wind direction is being announced without words, and the village listens with the seriousness of people who know that a little breeze can become an overnight lesson in humility. You start paying attention to the small sounds, not loud ones. This place does not do loud unless it absolutely has to. You hear the hush of needles underfoot, the gentle tick of moisture slipping off leaves, and farther out, the distant, occasional call of a seabird that sounds like it wandered inland and then remembered it had somewhere else to be. You notice when the birds quiet down, when insects become more active, when the air shifts from cool wet to cool wet with a faint metal edge. Your modern brain wants to label it and move on. Your body, however, recognizes it as the smell of weather organizing itself. As you walk, you notice prints in the damp needles, some human, some not. The human ones are practical, heel to toe, steady, consistent in depth, as if the walkers here do not waste energy on unnecessary stomping. The non-human tracks are lighter, more scattered. A small animal has crossed, leaving delicate imprints that look like punctuation marks. Another set of prints shows a quick pause near a storage area, two tiny dents close together, then a scatter away. You don't assign blame to the forest, you simply note life moves through the village as well as around it. You run your fingertips along a low log border that keeps the path from dissolving into the damp. The wood is slick with moss, and the moss is thickest on one side. Without anyone explaining, you understand, this side gets less direct sun. The village is reading light and shadow the way you once read notifications, except this information actually improves survival instead of stealing sleep. You almost laugh at the comparison, then decide not to because laughter feels like it would echo too far. The soil changes under your steps as you pass different areas. Near the dwellings, it is packed and slightly warmer, held by human activity and the gentle heat that leaks from earth-sheltered homes. Farther out, it loosens, darker and richer where leaves have decayed into something soft and fertile. You notice how certain plants thrive in certain patches, how ferns lean toward moisture, how tougher grasses occupy higher, drier ground. You begin to understand that the villagers aren't just living here, they are in a long conversation with the land, one that happens through careful noticing instead of grand speeches. You pass bundles of gathered materials, reeds, bark strips, branches selected for straightness, and the choices tell stories. The reeds are cut cleanly, the ends aligned, as if even harvest can be polite. Bark strips are curled, set under cover so they won't dry too fast and crack. Wood is stacked off the ground to avoid rot. Everywhere you look, the village is doing the quiet math of the seasons. Moisture versus dryness, warmth versus cold, abundance versus scarcity. There is no panic in it, just rhythm. The fog thickens for a moment, then thins just enough to reveal the forest beyond the clearing. Tall pines, deeper shadows, a world that feels both protective and indifferent. You realize the villagers read that too. They do not romanticize the forest, they respect it, and they respect their own limitations inside it. That respect creates a kind of calm that you can feel in your bones. It is not the calm of having no problems, it is the calm of knowing how to meet problems without making them bigger with fear. When you circle back toward the central warmth, the fire's glow appears through the fog like a small, steady star. The smell of porridge steam and roasted chestnuts finds you again, as if the village is gently tugging you home. You return to the edge of the shared heat with new eyes, carrying the understanding that here, even the ground is speaking, softly, constantly, and the people have simply learned to listen. You settle again near the fire, as if your body has been quietly voting for warmth this whole time. The central hearth does not blaze with theatrical ambition. It holds a steady, practical glow, the kind that says, without saying anything at all, that survival is mostly a collection of small, well-timed choices. The smoke curls upward, threads into fog, and disappears like a thought you don't need to finish. You watch the tending of the hearth with the attention you usually reserve for things that beep at you. Here, nothing beeps, nothing flashes, nothing pretends to be urgent while actually being nonsense. The fire's needs are simple: fuel sized correctly, airflow respected, embers protected from damp. A hand shifts a charred stick to open a pocket of breathing space. Another places thinner kindling at the edge, not smothering the flame, but feeding it gently. The result is immediate and quiet. The fire brightens, then steadies, like a tired person given exactly the right amount of reassurance. The pot of porridge sits close enough to warm, far enough not to scorch. Steam rises, and you notice how it thickens when the lid is lifted, how it thins when the lid returns. The movement is slow, unshowy, but precise. Time is being managed here, not chased. You realize the village's rhythm has an almost hypnotic effect. Once you begin following it, your inner noise starts to run out of fuel. Around the hearth, tools are arranged with the calm logic of people who do not lose things, because losing things is expensive. Stone blades rest on a mat, a wooden handle waits to be fitted, a cord of twisted fiber hangs where it won't tangle. A small pile of resin-dark adhesive sits ready, like the village's version of "Don't worry, we have tape." You lean in and notice the surfaces, stone edges kept sharp, wood smoothed where hands will grip, fibers braided tight enough to trust. You are invited, without ceremony, without pressure, into the orbit of daily work. Someone positions materials near you in a way that makes it clear you may help or you may simply observe, and either choice will be treated as normal. This is a rare privilege, the freedom to be useful without being judged for how fast you are. You take up a task that fits your sleepy hands. You sort kindling by thickness, laying it in a small, neat stack under cover. It is not glorious. It will not go viral. No one will award you a certificate. And yet, the moment you start, your mind softens. Your fingers learn the textures: dry twig, damp bark, resinous splinter. You place each piece with care because the fire will need it, and the fire, in its stubbornly honest way, will reveal whether you did it well. Nearby, another set of hands works on cordage, twisting fibers with a steady motion that looks almost like meditation. The fibers come from plants gathered earlier, softened and split into strands, then rolled against the thigh or between palms to create strong line. The movement repeats and repeats, so consistent it could lull you to sleep if you weren't so fascinated by its practicality. Cord becomes net, cord becomes binding, cord becomes the quiet link between what the forest offers and what the village can actually use. You notice how the village treats materials as partners rather than possessions. Wood isn't just wood, it is chosen for straight grain, for flexibility, for how it behaves when carved. Stone isn't just stone, it is selected for sharpness and fracture, for its willingness to become an edge. Even clay, waiting in a damp lump near a shelter, looks respected, kept from drying too quickly, protected like something alive. There is no wastefulness here, not because of virtue signaling, but because waste would be a direct insult to tomorrow. The pit dwellings themselves speak of steadiness. You move closer to one and feel the slight warmth that lingers around its entrance, the way earth holds heat like a patient friend. Inside, the space is dim, not gloomy, dim like a cave where you can finally stop performing your face. The floor is packed, the roof low enough to keep warmth close. Bedding sits raised from the ground, materials layered to trap heat. Tools are stored where they can be reached in the dark, because the dark is not feared, only accommodated. You linger at the threshold, letting the dwelling's atmosphere settle your breathing. There is something deeply reassuring about a home designed with the expectation that weather will happen. Rain is not a surprise here, it is a recurring character. Cold is not an emergency, it is a season with known habits. The village does not negotiate with reality. It simply meets it with preparation, and that, oddly, feels like kindness. Back at the central area, more small tasks unfold. A strip of bark fiber is softened, then pressed flat, ready to be woven. A stone point is retouched, tiny flakes removed with controlled taps so the edge returns to sharpness without being weakened. A net is checked for weak knots. Each action is quiet, deliberate, and oddly intimate. The village's productivity is not frantic, it is steady, and because it is steady, it feels restful rather than oppressive. You begin to understand why the humor here is so gentle. When life depends on cooperation and observation, there is no benefit in cruelty. Teasing exists, yes, but it is the kind that warms rather than wounds. Playful exaggerations expressed through body language, a dramatic pause, an over-careful placement of something simple as if the universe itself might applaud. You feel your mouth lift slightly, not into laughter that breaks the hush, but into the private grin of someone whose nervous system is finally being treated with basic respect. The fog outside presses closer, thickening in the spaces between pines. Moisture clings to everything, but the hearth holds its small sun. You catch the smell of chestnut again, sweet, earthy, lingering in the air like a reminder that comfort can be made from simple things if you slow down enough to let them work on you. And you think, with a quiet trace of sarcasm, how strange it is that you traveled all this way just to remember that warmth plus patience equals peace. Truly groundbreaking. You finish your small pile of kindling and sit back, hands warm, mind quieter. You feel the village's steadiness slipping into you, not as a lesson delivered, but as a rhythm borrowed. The fire breathes, the pot steams, tools rest where they belong. Outside, pine fog hushes the world into softness, and for once your thoughts stop sprinting ahead and simply walk, heel to toe, along the same damp needle path you followed earlier, unhurried, grounded, and safe enough to be slow. You drift away from the hearth with warmth still pooled in your palms, the kind that makes your fingers feel less like anxious little animals and more like parts of a cooperative body. The village's quiet work continues around you, steady as breath, and you find yourself drawn toward a sheltered area where bundles of long, pale fibers wait in patient coils. The shelter is simple: posts, a slanted roof, just enough protection to keep rain from turning everything into a damp tragedy. Under it, the air smells faintly sweet, like dried grass and bark warmed by smoke. Here, baskets are being made the way daylight becomes dusk, gradually, inevitably, and with no need for applause. You sit near the edge of the workspace, close enough to see details, far enough not to interrupt. A strip of fiber is tested between fingers, bent slightly to feel whether it will snap. Another is split with a controlled pull, separating into thinner strands that will bend more willingly. The hands working are calm hands, hands that have done this enough times to know that force is rarely the answer. The movements repeat, and repetition here is not boredom, it is stability. You pick up a strand that has been placed within your reach, an invitation without pressure. It is slightly rough, with tiny ridges that catch on your skin. You roll it between your fingers, feeling how it softens as it warms. The village has quietly arranged conditions for success: fibers that are ready, space that is sheltered, time that is unhurried. It is almost suspicious how kind that is. You begin by simply following the logic you see: over, under, tighten, release. The weaving pattern is not complicated, but it demands attention. The fibers want to spring back. Your hands have to persuade them to hold shape without breaking. Your first few motions are awkward, like learning to tie a knot with mittens on, but the fibers don't judge you. they just behave like fibers. And the people nearby don't correct you with sharpness. Instead, the work around you subtly demonstrates the right way, over and over, until your hands catch up. As the base of a basket forms, flat, then slightly cupped, you begin to understand why this craft feels so deeply calming. Weaving is a conversation with tension. Too tight and things buckle. Too loose and everything collapses later when you need it most. You adjust, you test, you respond. It is the same balance you spend your modern life trying to find, except here it's honest and visible. The basket tells you immediately whether you're panicking. You glance around and notice baskets everywhere, quietly proving their worth. Small ones for berries and nuts, medium ones for dried fish or gathered plants, larger ones reinforced for carrying wood. Some are new and pale, some darkened by years of smoke and use. Their surfaces hold the memory of hands. You realize these aren't just objects, they are infrastructure. Without them, gathering is harder, storage is messier, and the village spends more energy on chaos than it can afford. With them, the village becomes efficient in the gentlest way, through preparation. Humor drifts through this craft space like a warm draft. Someone lifts a nearly finished basket with exaggerated reverence, as if presenting a rare treasure instead of an everyday tool. Another person, older, calm in a way that seems carved into them, stops weaving for half a breath and tilts their head at the basket's slightly uneven rim, letting the tiniest hint of amusement land in their posture. It's the kind of joke that doesn't demand laughter, it just reminds you, perfection is not the point, usefulness is. You continue weaving and feel your breathing align with the pattern. Over, under, tighten, soften. Your mind starts doing what minds are supposed to do at night, dimming. Thoughts still appear, but they arrive quieter, like animals stepping cautiously into a clearing. The fog outside thickens and thins, but under this shelter, time feels steadier. You notice the fiber's origins. Some are reed-like, gathered from wet areas near the shoreline. Others appear to be strips of bark fiber, softened and beaten until pliable. Each material is chosen for a reason: strength, flexibility, resistance to moisture. The village's intelligence is embedded in these choices. Even the way fibers are stored, coiled, elevated, protected, shows a relationship with the future. They are always preparing without becoming anxious. That alone feels like a miracle. As your basket grows, you find the small satisfaction of progress that doesn't come with noise. It doesn't flash. It doesn't demand your attention with alerts. It just becomes. The rim begins to rise, and you learn to guide it with your thumbs, smoothing the curve so it doesn't warp. You realize you are holding shape in your hands, making something that can hold other things. That metaphor is almost too neat, but the village doesn't mind neat metaphors. The village simply does what works. A small pile of offcuts sits nearby, not discarded, just waiting to be repurposed. Nothing here is trash until it has been tried for every possible use. Short fiber pieces can become ties. Broken strands can be twisted into cord. Scraps can be kindling. Waste is not a moral failure here. It is an inefficiency that could cost warmth later. And that pragmatic respect for resources creates a sense of quiet abundance. The village feels rich, not because it has more, but because it uses what it has with skill. You pause to flex your fingers and feel a faint ache in your hands, an honest ache, the kind that comes from doing something real. It's different from the ache of scrolling too long or tensing in meetings. This ache feels like proof of presence. You look at the basket taking shape and feel a small private pride, quickly softened by the village's general attitude. Yes, you made a thing. No, it does not make you a legend. The fog outside presses in again. and the shelter's roof collects tiny droplets that occasionally fall with a soft tap. The sound is gentle, rhythmic, almost like a slow metronome for your nervous system. You resume weaving and let your shoulders drop. And as you work, you start to catch the village's deeper joke, one that is never spoken, only lived. The world is complicated, but your next step can be simple. Over, under. Tighten, soften. Make something that helps. Smile at the uneven rim. Keep going. The basket you've been coaxing into existence sits beside you now, still rough around the rim, still pale with newness, but undeniably useful. It holds its shape the way your mind lately has struggled to do. You run your thumb along the weave and feel the tiny ridges, the proof of patience. Under the shelter, fibers continue to become containers, and the rhythm of over, under, tighten, soften follows you even when you stand and step back into the damp air. The village draws you outward, toward the forest's pantry. You walk along a path that narrows into pine and undergrowth, where the fog grows thicker and the light feels filtered through needles and moisture. The ground becomes uneven in a friendly way, soft with leaf litter and old needles, dotted with roots that rise like knuckles. You learn to place your feet with intention, not because you're afraid of falling, but because stepping carefully feels like respect. Chestnut trees appear more frequently, broad, textured trunks and branches that hold the memory of heavy harvests. You can smell them before you fully see them, a faint sweetness mixed with damp bark. Scattered on the ground are spiky husks, opened like sea urchins that decided to become land creatures. Some husks are empty, cleanly split. Others still cradle a glossy brown nut, waiting to be freed by fingers that know how to avoid the spines. You crouch and pick one up carefully. The husk pricks even through caution, a small reminder that abundance isn't always polite. You use a stick to lever the nut free, then roll it in your palm. It's cool, smooth, and heavy for its size, like it's packed with stored sunlight. You place it into a woven container, and the simple act feels oddly ceremonial, as if the forest has handed you a gift and you've accepted it with proper manners. Around you, the village's gatherers move with quiet efficiency. They don't strip the ground clean. They choose, leaving some behind. You notice the pattern. Take what's ready, leave what's not. Take enough, not everything. This isn't sentimental. It's strategy shaped into habit. If you empty the forest today, tomorrow becomes a problem, and tomorrow is always coming. As you walk deeper, you begin to see that chestnuts are only one chapter in a much larger story. The forest offers edible plants that hide in plain sight, greens that thrive in shade, shoots that push through damp soil, roots that store energy underground. You watch careful hands select leaves with a practiced glance, avoiding lookalikes that could ruin everyone's night. The choices are subtle, a leaf's serration, the way a stem bends, the scent released when a plant is crushed gently between fingers. You learn the village's approach, observe first, harvest second. You lift a small cluster of greens and smell them. They have a clean, slightly bitter edge, nutrition with personality. You add them to your basket. The act is simple, but you feel the meaning in it. You are participating in the village's long relationship with its landscape. The forest is not scenery here. It is pantry, pharmacy, and teacher. The fog shifts again, revealing glimpses of sky through the canopy, pale, undefined, as if even the heavens are sleepy. You notice how damp clings to everything, and how the villagers compensate without complaint. They move with slightly bent knees for traction. They keep gathered plants elevated off the wet ground. They choose paths that avoid the slickest slopes. The competence is quiet, and because it's quiet, it feels comforting rather than intimidating. You come upon a spot where the ground is disturbed, Small, shallow scrapes as if something has been searching for its own meal. Tiny fragments of husk and leaf lie scattered. A small animal has been here, gathering too, and the village has not waged war against it. Instead, you notice how storage and timing matter. The forest is shared. The difference between hunger and comfort is not whether animals exist, but whether you prepare well enough to coexist. This thought lingers as you continue collecting chestnuts. You begin to see why the village roasts them and dries them and stores them carefully. Chestnuts are more than a snack. They are a winter strategy. They are food that can last, that can be carried, that can be turned into flour or porridge. They are the kind of resource that holds a community steady when the landscape gets stingy. You move through another grove and your basket grows heavier. You feel the honest weight against your arm, the gentle pull in your shoulder. It's not the weight of obligations you didn't choose, it's the weight of sustenance you helped gather. The difference is enormous. At a small clearing, you see a temporary sorting area. Gathered chestnuts spread on a mat, husks separated, questionable ones set aside. Someone checks each nut with a quick press, testing firmness, looking for signs of rot or holes. It's meticulous work, and it matters. One bad nut in storage can spoil others. One careless choice can waste a whole season's effort. The village's patience is practical. This is the kind of detail that makes a winter bearable. You glance toward the village direction and catch the faintest hint of smoke through the fog. It comforts you like a distant lighthouse. You think of the hearth you left, of the porridge steam, of the soft humor around the weaving shelter. You think of how everything here connects. Fibers become baskets. Baskets carry chestnuts. Chestnuts become meals. Meals fuel hands. Hands weave more baskets. It's a loop so clear it almost makes modern life look like a strange detour. As you turn back, you pass a patch where the ground is pale of a mushroom cluster. You don't touch them, your caution is wise, but you notice how the villagers mark the spot with a small, unobtrusive sign, a bent twig or a stone placed just so, a memory for later. A reminder that the forest offers in cycles and the village keeps track without writing anything down. When you return toward the clearing, your basket full, you feel an unexpected tenderness for the simple systems that keep people alive. You feel, too, the smallest seed of concern. If chestnuts matter this much, then their storage matters even more. And you remember the small animal scrapes, the scattered husks, the shared forest. It's nothing dramatic, it's just enough to make you pay attention. You walk on, the fog soft around you, the basket steady against your arm, and the sweetness of chestnuts waiting, like a promise, for the hearth's patient heat. You walk on, the fog soft around you, the basket steady against your arm, and the sweetness of chestnuts waiting, like a promise, for the hearth's patient heat. The village receives your harvest without fuss. Nuts spread on mats, spiky husks gathered aside. Then your attention drifts to a cooler corner, where the smell shifts from smoke and starch to something mineral and damp, like rain learning the shape of soil. Under a low shelter, the ground is dark with fine dust. Lumps of clay rest wrapped in leaves so they do not dry too quickly. And a stone basin holds water that trembles with each careful step. You kneel and let the chill climb into your knees. It steadies you, the way a cool cloth steadies a warm forehead. Clay is lifted and pressed, folded and turned, worked with a patience that makes your old pacing feel slightly absurd. Here, a vessel is not art in a separate category. It is a promise. Porridge that won't spill, water that can travel, dried food that stays safer through wet nights. Beauty arrives as a byproduct of skill, quiet, durable, unshowy. A piece of clay is placed within your reach. You take it and feel its density, cool and heavy, faintly gritty with tiny grains that keep it from being too delicate. When you squeeze, it yields without collapsing. When you roll it between your palms, it warms and becomes more willing, as if the earth is relaxing into your touch. Moisture becomes the invisible rule. Too wet and the walls slump. Too dry and the surface cracks. Balance again, but in a form your hands can measure. Clay grows by coils. A long rope of clay is rolled on a mat, then placed in a ring atop a small base. Fingers press it down, blend it into the layer beneath, smooth the seam until the join disappears. Another coil follows. The rim rises slowly, layer by layer, like dawn lifting without fanfare. No one wrestles the clay into shape, they guide it, as if the clay has its own opinion and deserves to be heard. Near the working hands lie cords, twisted fibers you recognize from net making and weaving. Here they become a signature pressed into wet clay, leaving repeating textures that catch light and hide small imperfections. You pick one up, feel its slight roughness, then press it gently against the vessel's surface. When you lift it away, the clay keeps the pattern, tiny ridges like waves, like pine needle paths seen from above. You do it again, and your breathing quietly matches the rhythm. Press, lift, turn, press. The pattern becomes decoration and practicality at once, helping grip when steam makes everything slick. It also leaves proof, an honest record that patience was present. Finished vessels rest nearby on woven mats, drying slowly. Wide-mouthed pots with flared rims sit beside smaller jars meant for storage. Some are smoothed, nearly plain. Others carry dense cord impressions, as if the maker wanted the pot to remember every loop of fiber it touched. None are identical. Each holds tiny variations that feel less like flaws and more like fingerprints left by time. You follow those vessels with your eyes and see how they fit into everything else. A jar means chestnuts can be kept drier, safer from damp air and small, curious mouths. A pot means gathered greens and nuts become warm meals instead of cold endurance. A bowl means sharing is easier and cleaner, less wasteful. The village's calm is built from containers. Farther out, beyond the dwellings, a firing area waits where smoke can rise freely. A shallow pit is lined with stones, ash layered from past firings like pale sediment. Wood is stacked in sensible sizes. Broken shards are kept because even failure becomes a tool, a scraper, an edge, a warning about hurry. The sequence is careful. Vessels dry slowly, then are arranged with space between them. Fire is built around, coaxed upward rather than forced. Heat rises, steadies, deepens. The village does not treat fire like spectacle. Fire is a colleague, powerful, moody, respected. As the firing continues, surfaces change. Clay darkens where smoke kisses it, lightens where heat cleans it, mottles where ash drifts and settles. Some vessels emerge with soft gradients like fog captured in earth. Others glow warmer, the color of roasted chestnuts. Experience guides chance, and chance returns something quietly beautiful. You return to the shelter and look at the small vessel you've helped shape. It is still damp, still fragile, still at the mercy of time. Your instinct is to keep fixing, keep improving, keep pushing. The village offers a gentler discipline. Leave it alone long enough to become strong. When you stand, your fingers are smudged with clay, and your palms carry a warmth that isn't only from the hearth. It's from doing one thing slowly, with attention, without needing it to impress anyone. Somewhere behind you, porridge steam rises again, and a chestnut shell cracks with a tiny, crisp sound. Fibers become baskets, clay becomes vessels, fire becomes food. And you move with the village's steady cadence, feeling yourself settle into the same practical peace. You leave the clay shelter with a faint dust of earth on your fingers, and you carry that grounded feeling as if it's another layer of clothing. Behind you, coils become vessels, fibers become baskets, smoke keeps riding in the fog. Your feet, however, keep angling toward a different kind of breath. You can taste it before you see it, a clean edge of salt on the air, the kind of freshness that makes your lungs feel newly rinsed. The pine fog loosens as you walk downhill. Needles give way to tougher grasses that don't mind wind. The ground firms under you, less spring, more grit, and the smell shifts from resin and hearth smoke to damp stone and seaweed. Ahead, water moves with slow, repeating certainty, not loud, not demanding, just present, like something huge resting in its own rhythm. When the shoreline opens, it doesn't flash for attention. It glows softly, muted by fog, as if the sea is being polite about its beauty. The tide is partway out, exposing slick rocks, pressed sand, and shallow pools that mirror a sky too sleepy to choose a color. Wind touches your face, cool, salted, and it takes something unnecessary from you, that stubborn tightness you've been carrying behind your eyes. This edge of the world runs on rules you don't get to negotiate. The sea does not care about your schedule. The sea will not follow up. It will tide in and tide out whether you are prepared or not. Oddly, that feels comforting. Here, certainty is not a threat, it's a cradle. Figures move along the waterline with calm purpose. They carry woven baskets, your recent under-over practice now fully vindicated, and they pause at tide pools with the quiet focus of people reading a familiar page. You follow at a respectful distance, watching how they place feet on wet rock, toes angled slightly for grip, knees soft, balance always ready to adjust. They don't fight the slickness, they cooperate with it. You kneel near a pool and find a whole small world trapped in clear water. Tiny fish flicker like quick punctuation. Seaweed waves slowly, a green-brown ribbon that looks half asleep. Shells cling to rock, barnacles and limpets like stubborn little shields. A hand reaches in, gentle but firm, twisting a shell free with practiced care. It drops into a basket with a soft, wet clack, and the basket accepts it without complaint. You try the motion yourself. Your fingers meet cold rock slick with algae, and for a moment you miss the modern universe of grippy mats and warning signs. You find the edge of a limpet shell and twist, slow and steady. It resists, then releases, and you lift it out, small, solid, and alive with the sea's stubbornness. You place it into the basket, and the success settles you in the quietest way. Your shoulders drop without being asked. Farther along, fishing happens with the same unshowy competence. Nets are checked near the rocks, knots tightened, weak points repaired before they become regrets. A few people wade knee-deep where the water is shallow and calm, moving in a careful arc. The net's bottom edge drags lightly along sand, weighted enough to stay honest. You can see how spacing matters. Too far apart and fish slip through. Too close and the net turns into a patient knotting lesson nobody asked for. When the net is drawn in, the motion is smooth and shared. Water streams through fibers. Small fish flash silver gray in the fog light, then settle, contained. No one turns it into spectacle. Satisfaction stays inside the body where it belongs, warming rather than flaring. The catch is sorted quickly. What will be eaten soon separated from what can be dried or smoked. That preservation logic is everywhere, quiet and relentless. Fish can be split and set near smoke so time does the hard work. Seashell can be cooked quickly. Warm food after cold wind is not a luxury here, it's a strategy. Seaweed can be rinsed and laid out to dry, becoming something that will brighten meals when the land is quieter. You remember the clay vessels drying back in the village, waiting for fire, and you see how everything supports everything else. Containers for storage, baskets for carrying, smoke for preserving, and shared hands for steady work. Even the shoreline teaches restraint. Hands don't scrape every rock clean. Gatherers move on after taking enough, leaving the rest to cling and grow. The tide will bring and take, and the village works with that rhythm instead of trying to dominate it. You find yourself copying the habit without thinking, taking carefully, moving gently, rinsing sand from your fingers before it gets into everything. You stand for a moment and look out. Fog erases the horizon so sea and sky blend into one soft sheet, and not seeing the end of things feels almost merciful. You don't need the whole picture tonight. You only need the next careful step, the next small gathering, the next shared motion of pulling a net in without drama. When you turn back toward the village, salt sits on your lips and your pulse feels steadier. The pine fog thickens again as you climb, and the shore's cool wind fades behind you, leaving a lingering clarity in your chest, like the ocean has quietly reminded you that some rhythms are bigger than worry, and you are allowed to rest inside them. You climb back toward the pine fog, with salt still ghosting on your lips, and the air changes again, less sharp, more resinous, like the forest is gently reclaiming you. The village returns in soft shapes, low roofs, smoke threads, warm light bleeding through fog like embers under ash. Your basket hand is empty now, but your body feels full in a quieter way, as if the shoreline rinsed you clean and the forest wrapped you back up. The central clearing is not louder for your return. It doesn't celebrate you. It simply makes space, the way a well-run place always does. Near the hearth, the mood has shifted from pure work to a kind of communal settling. Tools still exist, tasks still happen, but there's a looseness in posture, a softness in the way people move. You see a small cluster gathered around flat stones set in a rough circle. On the stones lie pebbles, smooth, rounded, selected for size and weight. The arrangement looks casual until you notice the care, each stone placed with intention, each pebble chosen the way someone chooses ingredients. This is play, but play with the village's signature, calm, practical, quietly funny. You sit at the edge of the circle, knees tucked, hands warm from lingering fire heat. Someone rolls a pebble between fingers, testing its balance, then sets it down as if it's a decision. Another hand nudges a line of stones into a straighter boundary, not out of obsession, but out of the same gentle competence you've seen everywhere. The game begins without an announcement. Pebbles are tossed toward a target area, sometimes a ring of stones, sometimes a small hollow scraped into the soil. The aim is simple: land close, land clean, land with control. It is astonishing how quickly the village's approach to tension shows up here. Some throws are confident, low, steady arcs that drop the pebble exactly where it should go. Others bounce, overshoot, roll away. The reactions are the important part. No anger, no humiliation, no performance of being above it. Instead, there's a quiet adjustment. Someone shifts their stance, tries again. Someone else makes a small, dramatic flourish with their wrist, as if the pebble is a legendary spear being launched across time, and the humor lands without breaking the hush. You take a pebble when it's offered. It's cool in your palm, smooth with tiny imperfections. You weigh it, then toss. Your pebble lands, bounces once, and stops farther from the target than you intended. An honest summary of your modern life, really. You feel the reflex to cringe, to apologize, to justify. The village offers you something better. Nothing. No one treats your imperfect throw like a crisis. The game continues. The world remains intact. You breathe, and you try again. On your second throw, you lower your arm, soften your wrist, and let the pebble fly with less force. It lands closer, settling in damp needles with a satisfying little hush. Your chest warms, not with victory, but with relief. You can be mediocre here and still be welcome. A child-sized figure, small but fierce in concentration, arranges pebbles in a neat line, then deliberately disrupts the line with a gentle sweep, as if demonstrating that order is optional and chaos can be funny when it's safe. Another person reacts by carefully rebuilding the line with exaggerated patience, placing each pebble as if performing sacred architecture. The joke is quiet and shared. Everyone understands the performance of seriousness, and everyone also understands that it's okay to laugh at it. Play expands beyond stones. Someone produces a length of cord and loops it into a simple pattern on the ground. It becomes a boundary, a challenge, a shape that invites movement. Feet step carefully in and out, balancing, not rushing, as if the goal is to stay graceful rather than to win. You try it and notice how your body has to listen, ankles adjusting, knees soft, weight shifting. It feels like a gentle lesson disguised as fun. Pay attention, move with care, don't fight your own balance. There is teasing, but it lives in gestures, not cruelty. Someone, after a particularly elegant step, makes an overly humble posture, as if bowing to invisible applause. Someone else answers with the tiniest shake of the head that somehow says, "Yes, we see you, you ridiculous creature, and we love you anyway." It's humor without volume, warmth without invasion. The hearth's presence anchors everything. Smoke drifts upward, and the fire's glow reflects faintly on damp surfaces, stone, wood, woven fibers. The smell of food mingles with laughter that never becomes noise. You realize something important. This village's rest isn't separate from its work. Rest is part of the system. Play is not wasted time. It is the glue that keeps people from fraying. It is proof that they are more than surviving bodies, they are living minds. The evening deepens. Fog thickens around the clearing like a curtain being slowly drawn. The game of stones continues in a softened way. Fewer throws, more pauses. People begin drifting away to tend small tasks, check on drying bundles, stir the pot once more. The communal circle loosens, but it doesn't break. It just rearranges itself into a new shape, the way smoke rearranges in wind. You hold a pebble for a moment before setting it down. It's cold, simple, and perfectly real. You think of how, back in your world, play often comes with an undercurrent of proving something. Here, play is a small lamp lit against long nights. It requires only attention and shared breath. As you rise, your muscles feel pleasantly used, your mind pleasantly quiet. You glance once more at the stone circle, at the pebbles resting where they fell, and you feel a gentle satisfaction. The village has shown you how to joke without shouting, how to compete without cruelty, how to be present without performing. It's not a grand revelation, it's something better, a practical comfort you can carry as easily as a pebble in your pocket. You carry that pebble-sized satisfaction back toward the village's practical heart, and the evening keeps folding into quieter shapes. Fog thickens, the fire steadies, and people drift from play to small maintenance without any abruptness. Even endings here arrive softly, as if the village refuses to slam doors in your nervous system. Near the hearth, the pot is checked once more. Porridge steam rises slower now. Greens from the forest pantry are rinsed and set aside. Shellfish from the shoreline waits in a shallow bowl. The night meal will be simple, warm, and honest. Then a different kind of attention gathers. It isn't panic. It's the tiniest tightening of movement, like a net pulled a fraction too taut. Several figures angle toward a storage area set slightly apart, where baskets and jars sit under a low overhang built to keep rain off the precious things that must last. You follow, not as an intruder, but as someone quietly included. The ground here is packed, marked by repeated steps. A row of clay jars rests on a raised platform of wood and stone, lifted away from damp earth. Their cord-marked surfaces catch faint firelight. Nearby, woven baskets, bigger, sturdier, hold dried bundles, husks, and sorted materials, the village's future arranged in calm stacks. A lid is lifted from one jar with care. Inside, chestnuts wait, smooth brown shells, dense little coins of stored sunlight. The sight should feel comforting. Instead, you feel a subtle absence. The jar is not empty, but the level sits lower than expected, and you understand that expectation is built from repetition. A hand pauses above the contents, fingers hovering as if feeling for a height that isn't there. Another jar is checked, lid lifted, contents observed, lid returned. The same pause arrives again, like a quiet bell only those who live here can hear. No one accuses, no one dramatizes. The village does not spend energy on outrage because outrage cannot be eaten in winter. But you can sense the quiet arithmetic behind calm faces. Chestnuts are porridge, flour, thickening for soups, steady calories when the forest goes sparse. A shortage is not a scandal, it is a question. You step closer and look for the obvious. The jars appear intact. Their rims are clean, lids set properly. The platform is solid. The overhang's thatch hangs low, doing its job. Everything looks correct, and that is precisely why the missing handfuls feel wrong. Your mind returns to earlier signs without turning them into a horror story. You remember the forest scrapes, small searching marks near fallen husks. You remember that life shares a pantry when it can. The thought lands in you like a pebble in damp needles, quiet, real, not easily ignored. The villagers continue their checks with the same restraint you saw at the shoreline. They compare jar to jar. They lift a larger basket, confirm what's inside, set it down again. Fingers trace corded ridges for cracks. A mat is pulled back to test for dampness beneath the platform. The motions are methodical, as if calm itself is part of the solution. You add your own attention because attention is the most respectful help you can offer here. You look at the ground around the platform. Pine needles have drifted in, but they do not lie in the same smooth layer you saw on the paths. In one corner, the needles are disturbed, as if something small has nudged through. A few husk fragments sit where they shouldn't, tiny spines and broken bits that look newly dropped. You crouch and bring your face closer to the packed soil. It holds faint impressions, not clear enough to declare a culprit, but clear enough to say this area has been visited. A narrow route seems to lead toward a darker gap under the overhang's edge, where shadow gathers and wood meets earth. It is the kind of gap that invites whiskers and quiet persistence. Again, you don't leap to conclusions, but the shape of the problem forms. Chestnuts are missing, not catastrophically, but consistently enough to be noticed. The jars are not smashed. The platform is not overturned. This is not a raid. It is a slow leak. The calm tightens a little, not into fear, but into focus. You recognize it from the net checks by the sea and from the way hands sorted chestnuts in the grove. The moment when precision becomes urgent because the season has quietly turned. You scan the storage area and see what an outsider might miss. Convenience brings the jars close to daily traffic. Fog dampens sound and softens edges. Damp can creep into a seal. Scent can travel. A small creature can learn a route the way you learned the needle path, by repetition and patience. A lid is set down again with extra care, as if sealing not only food, but steadiness itself. The village holds the question gently, the way you held that pebble earlier, solid, real, worth keeping. And you, who arrived expecting only comfort, find yourself drawn into the next quiet task, noticing, tracing, and restoring balance without turning it into drama. Fog breathes around the overhang, the fire keeps its small sun, the jars sit in corded silence, and somewhere nearby, in the spaces where needles shift and shadows move, an answer waits, as patient as everything else in this village. You stay crouched a moment longer, letting the storage area tell you what it can without being interrogated. The fog keeps breathing around the overhang, and the village keeps its calm like a practiced skill. You feel the temptation to turn this into a dramatic mystery, stormy music, wild accusations, a heroic stance under a pine tree. Instead, you do what this place has been teaching you all night. You look, you listen, you move slowly enough that details have time to appear. You begin with the ground. The packed soil beneath the raised platform is darker and slightly smoother, as if moisture has been lingering there. Pine needles lie in a thin layer, but near the corner you noticed earlier, they are disturbed in a narrow channel. It's the kind of disturbance that doesn't match human feet. It looks like something low and quick has been slipping through, hugging shadows the way fog hugs the forest floor. You shift your weight carefully and lean closer. A faint path seems to run along the platform's edge, then dip under the overhang's lowest line, where the thatch hangs like a curtain. You don't poke anything aggressively. This is not a battle scene. You slide your hand along the wood support, feeling for gaps, just enough space for a small body, just enough shelter for a creature that knows warmth and food are worth the risk. In the damp seam where wood meets earth, you find tiny marks. Not damage, not chaos, but the light scraping of repeated contact, the kind of trace left by persistence. Your attention moves from the ground to the jars themselves. You lift one lid slightly, only as much as necessary, and look at the rim. There's no crack, no obvious failure, but the seal is simple. Lid meets clay, gravity and care do the rest. In damp air, scent can travel, and scent is an invitation. You glance at a jar with a cord-marked surface and notice how those ridges, so beautiful and practical for grip, also hold microscopic pockets where moisture can sit. It doesn't ruin the jar. It just reminds you that nature is always trying to negotiate its way in. You set the lid back with extra precision, then scan for the smallest evidence of contact. On one jar, a smudge looks slightly different, more like a light brush than a human handprint. On another, a few grains of dried husk cling to the rim, as if something nosed close and didn't quite manage to be perfectly tidy about it. Nothing here screams. Everything whispers. You follow the whisper outward. The needle path that leads away from the storage area is darker than the paths near the hearth, where constant traffic keeps the ground warmer and more compact. Here, the needles sit looser, and impressions hold a fraction longer. You step just off the main track and look for the kind of marks you learned to see earlier. Tiny dents, slight drags, places where needles are pressed in a narrow line. The fog's moisture makes the forest floor more readable, like the world has turned up the contrast for careful eyes. A few steps away, you find a cluster of split husk fragments tucked near a root. The fragments look recent, not bleached and softened by days of rain, but crisp enough to suggest they haven't been there long. You lift one gently with a stick and notice the edges, broken in a way that looks more like gnawing than like human fingers. Small, repetitive bites. A creature's work, not a person's. That realization doesn't bring fear, it brings relief. If something is being taken, it may not be malice, it may simply be hunger doing what hunger does, quietly, repeatedly, opportunistically. You remember the tide pools and the way the village gathered without stripping. You remember the forest scrapes you saw earlier. Life shares space here. The difference between sharing and losing is often just planning. You keep moving, letting your steps stay soft so you don't crush the story under your feet. The trail of tiny disturbances doesn't run straight. It zigzags under a low shrub, around a rock, along the shadowed side of a fallen log where moss holds the damp in the dark. It feels fox-like in spirit, not because you see a fox, but because the pattern carries that same clever caution, moving where eyes are less likely to linger, choosing cover over speed, trusting familiarity more than bravery. Whatever it is, it knows the village's edges and uses them. Near the fallen log, you spot something that makes your stomach go gently still. A small cache. It isn't dramatic, it's almost polite. Under a tangle of bracken and leaf litter, nestled in a shallow hollow, lie a few chestnuts, unroasted, still in their smooth shells. Not dozens, not enough to be a catastrophe, just enough to confirm the shape of the problem. Chestnuts are being carried away and stored elsewhere, one or a few at a time, like drops of water taken from a bowl. You do not touch the cache. You simply note it, the way you noted the mushroom patch marker earlier. You take in the surrounding details, the direction of the hollow, the sheltering leaves, the faint path that leads back towards the storage area. Your mind wants to become a modern spreadsheet, tracking quantities, predicting loss rates, calculating winter impact. The village's calm steadies you back into something more useful. Next steps. You return towards the hearth's glow, but not directly. You circle, widening your sense of the village's boundary. Along the way, you notice other small signs. A thin run under a low wall of stacked wood. A spot where grass is pressed flat near a drying rack. A tiny opening near the base of a pit dwelling where warmth would leak like a silent beacon. None of these signs are evidence in a courtroom sense. They are simply the landscape admitting that creatures move through it. Back under the overhang, you reconsider the setup with new eyes. The raised platform is good. The jars are well made. The overhang does its job against rain. But the system assumes that the main threat is moisture, not curiosity. And curiosity, as you know from your own life, is relentless when it thinks something sweet is waiting. You begin leaving small markers, subtle ones, in the village's language. A bent twig near the platform corner. A pebble placed at the edge of a suspected run. Not traps, not harm, just a way to check later whether something passes again. It feels almost absurdly gentle, like you're playing the pebble game with the forest. But gentleness is not weakness here. It's precision. When you step away, the fog seems thicker, and the storage jars look more serious now. Not because anyone is panicking, but because you've seen how thin the line can be between enough and not enough. You feel the village's restraint as a kind of strength. No frantic searching, no angry stomping, just careful attention and a willingness to adapt. You head back towards the hearth's glow, carrying the knowledge that the problem has a shape and a path, and that solutions here will likely be as practical as baskets and as patient as clay drying before fire. And somewhere behind you, in the soft seams of shadow and needle, the quiet taker continues, small, steady, and convinced it has discovered the greatest secret in the world, that chestnuts exist and no one has told it to stop. You carried the knowledge back toward the hearth the way you carried that basket earlier, steady, careful, not spilling it into panic. The village's warmth meets you at the clearing's edge, smoke threading into fog, porridge steam rising with the calm certainty of something that will be eaten soon. For a moment, it almost feels like the problem could dissolve if you simply ignore it, but the jars under the overhang sit in your mind like stones in a circle, quiet, waiting, asking for attention. Then weather decides to add its own opinion. The fog thickens into something heavier, and the air cools with a sharper edge. It isn't a dramatic storm rolling in with theatrical lightning. It's worse in a practical way. Persistent damp, the kind that seeps, the kind that makes fire sulk and turns warmth into work. You smell it first, wetness deepening, soil breathing, a faint metallic note. Then you hear it, the soft, continuous tapping of moisture on thatch, and the whisper of rain beginning to stitch itself through the pine canopy. Rain here is not a surprise. It's a returning visitor with familiar habits. Still, it changes everything in small ways. The hearth becomes more precious immediately. People move with slightly quicker purpose, not frantic, just focused. A hand covers a stack of kindling more carefully. Another shifts firewood closer under shelter. Someone nudges the pot nearer the heat. The village's calm tightens again into that same useful concentration you saw at the shoreline met, steady, shared, efficient. You step in because there's something you can do that doesn't require words or authority. Protect the flame. Keeping a fire alive in damp weather is mostly about protecting its breath. Too much wet wood and it smokes and sulks. Too little airflow and it chokes. Too much airflow and it burns too fast and wastes fuel. Balance, again, always balance. You gather the driest kindling you can find, thin sticks stored under cover, bark strips that hold resin, small pieces that catch quickly. You set them aside on a mat that stays dry. Then you look at the fire itself. Its flame is lower now, more orange than yellow, licking at wood with less enthusiasm. The embers, however, still hold a quiet promise, red points glowing under ash, heat waiting to be encouraged. You use a stick to shift ash aside, exposing embers to air. The fire responds with a faint brightening, like a sleepy eye opening halfway. You place thin kindling near, not on, so the heat can dry it slightly before it is asked to burn. You wait, and waiting is suddenly an active skill rather than a passive inconvenience. The damp world presses in, but the embers persist. Around you, the village adjusts. Doorways of pit dwellings are partially screened with mats to keep wind and rain from stealing warmth. Wet items are hung under overhangs, placed where smoke can help dry them. People move with a deliberate economy of motion, conserving energy. Even their posture changes, shoulders slightly forward, heads angled down, not from defeat, but from the practical need to keep faces out of the cold wet. You glance toward the storage area and feel your attention split. Rain is not only a challenge for fire, it is a challenge for everything that must stay dry. Clay lids must seal against damp air. Baskets must be protected from moisture that could soften fibers or invite rot. Chestnuts, so sweet and precious, must stay safe from both weather and small opportunistic mouths. Rain complicates every system at once, and you understand why the village's calm is a practiced craft. Without calm, you waste heat on fear. The fire strengthens slightly. Small flames catch on the driest kindling. Smoke thickens, then steadies, and a warm draft rises. It is not a bonfire, but it is enough. You feed it slowly, adding slightly thicker pieces once the base is strong. The fire responds like a creature regaining trust. And still, rain keeps tapping. The sound becomes a background lullaby, soft, repetitive, almost hypnotic. If you were only here to sleep, it would be perfect, but the village hears it as information. How heavy it is, how long it might last, how it will affect tomorrow's gathering and drying. You watch how they read the rain without visible worry. They notice drip lines from the thatch and redirect them with small adjustments. They shift mats to catch runoff. They protect tool handles from swelling with moisture. Tiny actions that prevent larger problems later. In the storage area, someone checks the overhang again, tugging thatch down a fraction to keep rain from blowing in sideways. A jar lid is pressed, reseated, tested. You remember the tiny run paths under the platform and the cache under bracken. Rain will blur tracks, wash away crisp husk fragments, soften evidence into mush. If you plan to confirm movement later, you need markers that resist weather, pebbles, sticks, subtle placements that rain won't erase easily. You think of the pebble game again and feel a faint sleepy irony. You're still playing, just with different stakes. The village's mood remains composed, but you can sense the strain that damp brings. Not anger, not conflict, just the honest work of maintaining comfort. People are quieter now, less playful, more inward. Heat draws bodies closer. Shoulders hunch around bowls, hands linger near the hearth longer. Your own skin responds too, seeking warmth, seeking dryness, seeking a reason to soften again. You stay near the fire and keep feeding it in small, intelligent steps. You listen to the rain and to the subtle sound of embers shifting under ash. You notice how smoke thickens when a slightly wet stick is added too soon, and how the flame improves when you wait, when you respect the fire's pace. You learn again that impatience is expensive. The rain does not last forever, but it doesn't hurry to leave. It settles into the night like a damp blanket, and the village settles with it, adjusting systems without complaint. And in that steady adjustment, you begin to see the larger shape of the coming solution. If the village can keep warmth steady and rain, it can keep chestnuts steadier too, by sealing better, storing smarter, and guiding both weather and wildlife into less costly paths. For now, though, the task is simple. Keep the hearth alive, keep people warm, keep calm from fraying. The fire breathes under your care, the rain taps its slow rhythm, and the pine fog village holds together the way woven fibers hold together, through tension balanced by patience and warmth protected by attention. The rain keeps tapping its quiet insistence, but the hearth holds, and that alone changes the whole mood of the night. When warmth remains steady, minds stay steady. When minds stay steady, solutions have room to arrive without being dragged in by panic. You watch the village shift from endurance back into planning. It happens in small motions, an extra check of the kindling stack, a pot nudged to a sweeter spot near the embers, a mat adjusted so dripping water doesn't get ideas. The rain is still here, yes, but it's no longer the main character. The village's competence is. And with the fire stabilized, attention returns to the other quiet leak, chestnuts. You move toward the storage overhang again, the fog thick and damp enough to soften edges, but not enough to hide the practical truth you've already seen. The platform is good, the jars are good, the overhang is good. And yet, a small, clever hunger has found a seam in the system and has been taking, politely, persistently, like a tiny tax collector who never sleeps. The village doesn't respond with rage, it responds with upgrades. First comes the simplest improvement: reduce invitation. You notice how much scent must be drifting from jar rims, from cracked husks in nearby baskets, from the general sweetness that clings to everything when chestnuts are being handled. In damp air, smell carries like gossip. So the village begins quietly cleaning and consolidating, husk fragments gathered and moved farther away, handling areas swept, mats shaken out. It's not sterile, it's just less enticing. You help gather the tiny spiky husk bits that seem to multiply whenever you turn your head, and you relocate them to a covered pile where they can later be burned or composted safely away from storage. Not glamorous work, but neither is winter. Then the storage itself is reconsidered. You watch hands test lids again, but now with a different focus. Not just, is this closed, but how closed is it, in rain, in fog, in scent? A thin smear of clay slip, watered clay that becomes a natural seal, is prepared in a small bowl. You recognize the smell: earth, wet stone, the same mineral calm you felt at the pottery shelter. Lids are lifted one at a time, rims wiped clean, then reseated with that thin clay line acting like a gentle gasket. It isn't modern engineering, but it's the same principle: reduce gaps, reduce airflow, reduce aroma escaping into night. You do the careful work too, running your finger along a rim, smoothing the slip so it's even, then setting the lid back down with a precision that feels oddly tender. The jar becomes quieter, not only in sound, but in smell. Even your own brain seems to approve because it stops spinning worst-case scenarios and starts focusing on the next small step. Next comes elevation and stacking. The platform, already raised, gets a subtle improvement, a second layer of support stones repositioned to eliminate the small shadow gap you traced earlier. Not a barricade, not a fortress, just a reduction of easy access. Where there's a narrow run under the edge, a flat stone is slid into place. Where a beam meets the ground at a tempting angle, the space is tightened. You remember the fallen log path and the cache under bracken, and understand you're not trying to punish the forest's hungry visitor. You're simply making the storage less convenient than the wild pantry outside. Baskets of chestnuts are also rearranged. Instead of sitting close to the platform edge, they're moved inward, higher, and under a tighter cover. Heavier items are placed at the base, lighter ones above, with smooth surfaces outward so there are fewer ridges to grip. It's the same logic as weaving: tension balanced, structure supported, no weak points left where collapse can start. You glance at your own half-imperfect basket and feel an internal nod. Yes, this is why the rim matters. Then comes the cleverest part: smoke as a guardian. You've already seen how smoke is not just a byproduct here. It is preservation, drying, protection. In damp weather, smoke becomes even more valuable, an invisible tool that keeps warmth and dryness close. So the village shifts some of the chestnut processing into a smoke drying rhythm. Chestnuts that would have waited for later are split and set on drying racks closer to the hearth's smoke stream, high enough to avoid direct heat, close enough to benefit from steady warmth and the drying effect of smoke. You watch the transformation. Damp sweetness becomes firmer, less aromatic in the open air, more stable for storage. Smoke's scent also does something quietly strategic. It muddies the sweetness that attracts small opportunists. It doesn't erase it, but it complicates it. It turns a clear signal into a noisy one. If you were a small creature following scent lines, you'd suddenly have to work harder, and in nature, harder often means not worth it. You help build a simple smoke path, mats adjusted so smoke drifts through a narrow channel under cover toward the drying area, then out. Not enough to choke anyone, not enough to make the village a permanent fog machine, just enough to bathe stored goods in a protective haze. The village is not fighting the environment, it's using the environment, fog, smoke, damp, as part of the solution. Then finally, you add the quiet monitoring that fits this place's tone. Earlier, you placed bent twigs and pebbles as subtle markers. Now those markers become a system. A pebble sits at the edge of a suspected run. A thin reed leans against a stone in a way that will shift if brushed. A small scatter of dry needles is arranged, innocent leaf looking, but readable tomorrow if disturbed. It's almost the pebble game again, except now the target is knowledge. Did something pass? Where and how often? No traps, no harm, just accountability for movement. Rain continues to tap and hiss softly in the thatch, but under the overhang, everything looks more intentional now. Jars are sealed more carefully, gaps are reduced, chestnuts are cleaner, drier, less fragrant in the open. Smoke lingers where it can do the most good. The village storage feels less like an invitation and more like a quiet decision the village has made. This is ours to keep. You step back and feel the relief move through you like warmth spreading from embers. The problem hasn't been defeated, it's been understood and met with calm structure. It's the village's signature solution. No drama, no cruelty, just practical kindness toward its own future. You return to the hearth's edge again and let your hands hover near the heat. Outside, pine fog and rain keep their soft, persistent weather. Inside the village's system, however, things have tightened in the best way, like a well-woven basket holding steady, like clay drying before it meets fire, like a community that knows the difference between panic and progress. Relief moves through you like warmth spreading from embers. Rain still whispers on thatch, but the village's systems feel quieter now, sealed, tightened, less inviting. Jars sit with thin clay slip rims, lids pressed down with careful weight. Split chestnuts rest on drying racks where smoke turns sweetness into something firmer, less loud to the night air. The weather eases, not dramatically, but enough to change the soundscape. The tapping thins, drips slow, fog stays, yet it lightens in patches, and the smell shifts from wet metal back toward resin and ash. The fire breathes easier, people fold into pit dwellings, tools are set where they belong. The village settles, as if rest is simply another kind of maintenance. You remain near the hearth, close enough to feel heat and far enough to let it do its work on you. Your eyelids grow heavy, and the last murmurs of rain try to lull you into forgetting the pebble markers you placed like quiet witnesses. In the dark hours, you wake, not startled, just gently lifted by a small change in sound. Not a crash, not a shout, a faint brush, like needles nudged under a low edge. You keep still. If you leap up, you become the loudest creature in the forest. If you remain calm, the forest shows what it came to do. Through fog and smoke, the storage overhang looks the same as before, orderly, covered, calm. And yet a small shape moves low at its edge, too small for a person, too quick to be wind. It pauses where you slid a flat stone to tighten the gap. The stone does its quiet job. The shape noses along the seam, tests, hesitates, then shifts course with the efficient irritation of something discovering its favorite route has been politely closed. It tries beneath stacked wood and meets another tightened space. It tests again, brief, stubborn, then angles toward the drying racks, drawn by the idea of food and baffled by smoke that turns sweetness into noise. After one small circle, it retreats, dissolving into fog like a thought you almost remember at dawn. You let your eyes close again with a private, sleepy satisfaction. The measures work. Not perfectly, not forever, but enough. Morning arrives as pale light seeping through fog, turning smoke into soft ribbons. The village stirs quietly, practically, like the day is a tool taken down from a shelf. You go straight to the storage area and check your markers. The pebble has shifted. The reed leans at a new angle. A scatter of dry needles is disturbed in a narrow line that doesn't match human steps. Something came, tested, moved, left. You follow the line outward the way you followed tide pools, patient, observant, letting the land speak. Near the edge of the clearing, under bracken, the small cache shows itself again. A few chestnuts are gone. A few new ones sit in their place. Fresh husk fragments lie nearby, bite marks small and repetitive, like a tiny tool working through shell. Then you see the culprit without needing to chase it. Near a root tangle where pine needles gather in a dry cushion, a small squirrel-like creature sits in half-light, compact and intensely focused. It holds a chestnut in its front paws and rotates it as it gnaws, shell giving in careful increments. Its tail flicks once, as if mildly offended by damp weather and the general existence of obstacles. When it notices movement, it freezes, bright-eyed and ready to vanish. You do not lunge. You simply watch. The truth settles into place. The chestnut shortage is not sabotage, not betrayal, not a dramatic villain brooding under an overhang. It is a small animal doing what small animals do, finding a reliable food source and returning with relentless, quiet optimism. You probably won't survive the irony. Cord-marked jars, raised platforms, smoke-managed storage, careful sealing, and the heist is being run by something that weighs less than your worries. The village receives this truth the way it receives weather, with acceptance and adjustment. The tightened gaps remain, the clay slip seals stay, smoke drying continues because it protects food and steadies mood, but another layer is added, one that feels almost like a gentle wink at the forest. Lesser quality nuts, already set aside for being soft or blemished, along with cracked husks, are placed farther from the storage area near the runs the creature already uses. Not a feast, not indulgence, just enough to redirect habit away from the jars that must last. Spiky husks are arranged lightly along the platform's easiest edges, not to injure, but to make approach uncomfortable, so the easier option becomes the decoy pile near the forest line. No cruelty, no chaos, just structure built from what is already on hand. You feel tension soften across the clearing, not because anyone is careless about winter, but because the problem is now small, visible, manageable. Fear drains away when an invisible enemy becomes a very ordinary hunger with a fluffy tail. Back at the hearth, chestnuts crack open again. Steam rises from porridge. Smoke curls into pine fog like a long exhale. The village's quiet humor returns, present, without noise, as if everyone shares the same unspoken shrug. Of course it's a squirrel. Of course it is. The world rarely steals with drama. It steals in teaspoons, and it teaches you to plan in teaspoons back. The morning's pale light keeps spreading through fog, and with it, the village's mood loosens into something warmer than problem solved. It feels more like balance restored, which is a different kind of relief, less triumphant, more sustainable. The jars sit sealed and steady under the overhang. The decoy pile rests nearer the forest line like a quiet compromise. Smoke drying continues, not as an emergency measure now, but as a habit worth keeping. The day settles into ritual. You move with the village through motions that have clearly been practiced for generations. There is no announcement of, now we do gratitude, no formal performance. Gratitude here is embedded in how people handle things. A bowl is rinsed with care. A tool is set down where it won't be stepped on. A bundle of reeds is stored where it won't rot. These small attentions are the village's way of saying thank you to the forest, to the sea, to each other, to the fact that they woke up again. Near the hearth, the meal comes together in layers. The porridge pot is stirred, slow circles, steady heat, until it thickens and the steam smells richer. Chestnuts are peeled, their warm insides broken into pieces that disappear into the pot like sweetness dissolving into comfort. The gathered greens are added at the right moment, not so early they become dull, not so late they stay stubborn. Shellfish from the tide pools is cooked simply, the briny scent rising and mingling with smoke. Even the sound of it is gentle, soft bubbling, the quiet tap of a lid, the hush of steam escaping. You notice how the village uses taste as memory. Chestnut sweetness speaks of the grove. Greens speak of damp shade and careful identification. Shellfish speaks of cold wind and slick rocks. When everything meets in one pot, it's as if the landscape becomes edible, and eating becomes a way of carrying the world inside without needing to own it. You accept a bowl and cradle it in both hands. The heat warms your fingers first, then your chest. You eat slowly, letting flavor unfold without rushing to the next bite. The porridge is thick, grounding. The chestnuts add soft sweetness. The greens lend a clean bitterness that keeps the bowl from becoming cloying. The whole thing tastes like steadiness. You cannot help the small sarcasm that rises in you, quiet and affectionate. Imagine if your modern life had a system this functional. Imagine if your biggest daily problem was a squirrel running a minor snack operation. After the meal, The village transitions as if choreographed, but without any visible conductor. Bowls are cleaned, ash is managed, new wood is placed where it will dry. The decoy pile near the forest line is checked and adjusted, not as a bribe, but as a redirection that keeps both parties alive. Someone checks the clay slip seals again, smoothing a rim where yesterday's damp might have lifted it slightly. It's maintenance, not paranoia. Then you are drawn toward another kind of ritual, one that isn't about food, but about meaning. At the edge of the clearing, a small area is kept tidy, a place where shells, bones, and worn shards collect in an orderly scatter. It isn't a dumping ground, it's a layered memory of meals and making. Broken pottery pieces lie there, cord-marked patterns still visible even in fragments. Shells from tide pools stack like pale crescents. Charcoal flecks rest in the soil like old embers. The village does not hide its remnants. It keeps them in a place where the past can be noticed without becoming clutter. You stand there and feel time differently. In your world, yesterday disappears under new schedules. Here, yesterday remains as a thin layer, and the layers build calmly. The village doesn't cling, it simply acknowledges. Later, the communal mood returns, lighter now that the shortage has a simple explanation and a workable response. People move between dwellings with an ease that feels earned. Work happens, yes, but it doesn't consume everything. Someone checks nets near the shoreline. Someone repairs a basket rim. Someone rolls clay into coils. The village's activities interlock like a woven pattern, each strand supporting the next. You find yourself back near the stone circle where pebbles rested the night before. The stones are still there, damp now, darker from rain. A few pebbles remain where they fell. The sight triggers a small internal callback, like a gentle bell. You remember your first throw landing far off, the relief of not being judged, the quiet humor of exaggerated reverence for a simple stone. That same spirit lives in today's work. Imperfect is allowed, correction is gentle, community holds shape. As the afternoon fades into another soft evening, smoke thickens slightly in the cooling air. Someone sets split chestnuts on the drying rack again, not because of crisis, but because it's wise. The decoy pile is refreshed with a few blemished nuts, placed far enough away to keep the jars from becoming the forest's favorite rumor. You think of the squirrel, bright-eyed and stubborn, and you feel a surprising fondness. It wasn't malicious, it was simply alive, and its hunger reminded the village to tighten systems, to plan better, to honor winter's reality with calm structure. The day closes with small motions that feel almost sacred. Tools are returned, fibers are covered, a mat is rolled neatly, the hearth is banked so embers will last. People drift toward pit dwellings in a quiet flow, and the village's edges soften again under fog. You linger near the fire and feel your body settle deeper into this rhythm. Gratitude here is not spoken, it's practiced. It's in the way hands handle bowls, in the way seals are smoothed, in the way even the forest's small fief is redirected rather than punished. And you, warmed by chestnut porridge and by the rare relief of being in a place that doesn't demand spectacle, let that practice soak into you, slowly, steadily, like smoke soaking into thatch, like calm soaking into a tired mind. You wake into a village that feels lighter, as if the night wrung out whatever tension it could and left only the useful parts behind. Fog still rests in the pines, but it has thinned enough that trunks stand in clean vertical lines, like quiet pillars holding up the morning. Smoke rises from roof vents in narrow threads, and for once it doesn't have to fight the rain. It simply lifts, curls, and dissolves, the way a thought leaves when you finally stop gripping it. You sit near the banked hearth and let your eyes adjust. The embers have been kept like a secret, covered, protected, still alive. Heat reaches you in a gentle pulse, and your body answers with a slow unclenching that now feels almost automatic. Around you, the village begins its day without fanfare. Mats shaken with care, a pot rinsed and set upside down to dry, a coil of cord looped where it won't tangle. No one calls it self-care. It is simply competence, repeated until it becomes calm. When you finally stand, you feel the pull to walk one last circuit, not to stage a dramatic goodbye, but to let the places you touched settle into memory in the right order. Your feet find the needle path, and the ground answers with the same hush that has been lulling you since you arrived. Damp needles compress, spring back, and swallow the urgency you usually carry around like a second spine. You pass the weaving shelter first. Bundles of pale fiber sit under cover, patient and ready, and finished baskets rest stacked nearby. Their rims are slightly uneven in the honest way that proves they were made by hands instead of standards. You remember the over-under rhythm and the way it trained your breathing to match tension rather than argue with it. You run your fingers lightly along a rim and feel the ridges, and you think of how a basket doesn't need perfection to hold what matters. It only needs steady tension, honest materials, and the willingness to keep going. Near the clay shelter, the air cools and turns mineral again. The vessel you helped shape rests on a mat, surface firmer now, cord mark patterns holding steady like gentle tracks. It looks sturdier than you expected, as if the earth itself learned patience while you were learning it too. You remember smoothing clay slip along jar rims under the storage overhang, earth sealing earth, and you feel the quiet satisfaction of a solution that doesn't shout. Slow work becomes protection, and protection becomes peace. You drift toward the storage area and pause under the overhang. Jars are arranged with more intention now, gaps tightened, lids seated with thin seals that make scent less eager to travel. Split chestnuts rest on the drying rack, smoke having softened their sweetness into something steadier, less loud to the night air. Farther out, near the forest line, the decoy pile sits like a polite compromise. You remember the bright-eyed little thief and its offended tail flick, and the entire crisis lands in you as something manageable, almost tender, the way a small ache becomes easier once you name it. Your circuit carries you toward the shoreline path because you want the sea's rhythm once more before you leave. As you walk downhill, resin gives way to salt, and the fog opens into pale sheets. The waterline is muted and luminous, tide moving in its slow, repeating certainty. Tide pools glimmer with small trapped worlds, seaweed sways like a soft metronome, shells cling to rock with stubborn patience. The sea doesn't flatter you, it simply repeats its truth. Some rhythms are bigger than worry, and you are allowed to rest inside them without explaining yourself. You turn back inland and climb toward the pines, letting the wind rinse your face one last time. Near the clearing, the stone circle still sits where pebbles rested the night before. A few stones have been moved, but the intention remains. You remember your first throw landing wide and your instinct to apologize, and you remember the relief of being allowed to try again without being made smaller. Under the tallest pines, you pause and listen. Mist gathers and releases around the trunks. Droplets hold on needles, then let go with soft taps. A seabird calls faintly and then quiets again. As you complete the circuit, you notice the village noticing you. No one crowds you, no one performs emotion. Hospitality arrives as logistics, a path cleared before you reach it, a bundle nudged aside so you won't trip, a pot shifted away from the walkway. It is care expressed through practical foresight, and it settles in your chest like warmth. The day leans toward afternoon, and you understand that your leaving should match your arrival, quiet, continuous, without a hard edge. You return once more to the hearth's edge, not to restart anything, but to anchor the last sensations: porridge steam, resin on wet bark, the mineral coolness of clay, the hush of needles, the soft humor that made room for you. You let those details settle into you like sediment in clear water, small weights that make you calmer rather than heavier. Then you turn toward the path that leads out beneath breathing pines, carrying the village's steadiness with you as a rhythm your body now knows how to follow. You step onto the needle path that leads away, and the village does not make a spectacle of your departure. It simply keeps being itself. Smoke rising in thin threads, roofs crouched low against weather, hands moving with quiet competence. That steadiness follows you like a warm scent, even as the pines close in and the fog thickens, softening the edges of everything you thought you needed to hold so tightly. Your feet remember the ground's language now. Damp needles compress and release, heel to toe, unhurried, as if the forest has taught you a better tempo. You pass the last pit dwelling and catch one final ribbon of porridge steam drifting from a roof vent, gentle as a sigh. For a moment you want to turn back, not because you fear leaving, but because your mind loves a loop. It loves to return to the place where it finally felt safe. You let the impulse rise and pass, and you keep walking, because the village is safe behind you, and its steadiness is already in your ribs. Fog gathers low among the trunks, and the pines stand like patient witnesses. Moisture beads on needles and occasionally drops with a soft tap that sounds like punctuation in a sentence you no longer need to rush through. You breathe in resin, earth, and the faintest trace of smoke, and you notice how different your body feels. Shoulders no longer braced as if an invisible demand might step from the shadows. Jaw no longer clamped as if you are preparing to defend yourself from a problem that hasn't even happened yet. The quiet here isn't emptiness, it's space. Enough room to feel your own breath again, to hear your steps, to remember that being alive can be simple. The path bends along the edge of the chestnut grove. Spiky husks lie scattered like reminders that abundance can be prickly and still worth it. You remember levering a nut free with a stick, the smooth shell heavy in your palm, the sweetness released by heat. You also remember the quiet shortage, the jars sitting a little lower than expected, the disturbed needles under the overhang, the cache under bracken. The bright-eyed little thief returns in your memory, compact, focused, tail flicking with offended dignity. And you remember how the village answered with structure instead of cruelty, redirecting hunger without pretending hunger is shameful. A faint salt edge arrives as the land dips. The sea is not in view, but you can taste its memory in the air, clean and cool, like a rinse for thoughts. You pictured tide pools holding tiny worlds in clear water, shells twisted free with practiced care, nets drawn in without triumph, and a horizon erased by fog so you could rest without needing to see the end of everything. The sea's steady pulse layers over the forest's hush, and your heartbeat stops acting like an alarm and becomes, again, a simple drum you can walk beside. You reach a small clearing where the fog loosens just enough to show the village behind you, half swallowed by mist. Smoke threads rise and vanish, as if the place is already being folded back into the landscape that sustains it. You stop without calling it a goodbye. You simply stand, and let your mind take inventory. The basket rim under your fingers, the under-over pattern that trained your breathing to match tension instead of fighting it, the cord mark pressed into soft clay, ridges that turned grip into beauty, the clay slip seals smoothed like careful promises, the hearth's embers protected under ash so the night never went fully cold. You remember the stone circle and the pebble toss, the relief of being allowed to miss and still remain welcome. You remember the village's quiet jokes expressed through exaggerated care, humor arriving like warm air instead of like noise. You remember how work and rest braided together here, not as opposites, but as partners. Even the rain felt less like punishment and more like information, something to read, to adapt to outlast with steady hands. It isn't a grand lesson delivered from a stage, it is a practical comfort. Do one small thing well, then let it be enough. You turn and continue, and the forest seems to approve of your steadiness by offering small kindnesses, firmer ground where it could have been slick, a gap between roots where you might have stumbled, a brief thinning of fog that lets you see the path ahead without demanding you see the whole journey. You take the lesson with you because it is almost embarrassingly useful. You do not need the entire future to take the next step well. You need only the next careful placement, the next small seal, the next breath that returns you to the present. The pines begin to thin, and the air loses the faint smoke note that has been following you like a warm scarf. Tenderness arrives fully instead of being dodged. It is a quiet farewell, like setting a bowl down gently after a warm meal. No slam, no rush, just gratitude expressed through care. You carry the village's steadiness the way you carried chestnuts in a woven basket, close, balanced, protected from spilling. And when the last hint of hearth warmth fades from the air, you find that it has not disappeared. It has moved into you, into slower breathing, softer shoulders, a willingness to be imperfect and still remain whole. You walk on under breathing pines, fog closing behind you like a blanket being pulled up with patient hands, and you let yourself be escorted towards sleep by the oldest, simplest history of all: warmth, work, humor, and the gentle art of continuing. You keep walking, but the walk becomes less about distance and more about letting the last images settle inside you. The fog stays behind, holding the village gently, and the pine scent thins until it is only a memory on your breath. You feel the rhythm you learned there, over and under, tighten and soften, still moving through your hands, even though your hands are empty. It is the kind of knowledge that doesn't ask to be proven, it only asks to be lived, slowly. Your thoughts become fewer and kinder. Each one drifts in like smoke, curls once, and slips away without demanding an answer. You remember the warmth of the hearth, the calm care that kept embers alive through rain, the steady sweetness of chestnut porridge, and even the small creature that tried its luck and was gently redirected. Nothing needs to be dramatic to be real. It is enough that you were held for a while and that you learned how to hold yourself. You let your shoulders drop again, as if someone has placed a soft blanket there. Your breathing lengthens, unforced. In the distance, the sea continues its patient work, and the pines continue their quiet standing, and you understand that the world is allowed to be simple sometimes. You are allowed to rest without earning it, to be imperfect without punishment, to close your eyes without fear that everything will fall apart. So you carry the village with you, not as a place you must return to, but as a gentle way of moving through the next night and the next. The fog fades, the smoke fades, the last light softens, and in that softening you feel yourself drifting, safe and steady, as if the forest itself leans close and leaves a breath against your ear. End of story. Sweet dreams.